Guys, welcome to the Elsa Kurt Show. I'm your host, Elsa Kurt. Today I have with me Michael Crowe. He is from Heroes Comfort, and he's got some really valuable, important information to share with us today, and a personal story as well. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Elsa, for having me.
Absolutely. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey of becoming a firefighter and EMS also, EMT also, and tell me a little bit about what inspired you to go that path.
Well, I'll start with the inspire part, with what interests me in doing fire and EMS, because that kind of leads into the career itself. So when I was a kid, I lived in a town of about 600 people, and we had the old town whistle that would go off whenever there was a fire or EMS call. And I lived right on the main drag of the town that led to the highway. And when that whistle would go off, I would run out to the street, in the middle of the street, and watch, all these volunteers fly by. What really got me was the fact that they could skid around the corners. And, that was kind of what initially interested me. But I went into the service out of high school, and I was part of the shipboard rescue team. I was in the Navy, and that's really where my interest in at least the healthcare part sparked. So when I did my stint in the Navy, I did a stint in the Army where I became a medic. And then after I got out of the Army, I went to actual EMT school, then paramedic school. So I got my initial EMT in 1992, my paramedic in 1997. I've worked different states. I worked in Topeka, Kansas. I worked in a small community in rural Kansas. And most recently, I retired from Newton, Iowa Fire Department as a firefighter paramedic. As a paramedic, I never thought that I wanted to run into a fire. I wanted nothing to do with that at all. And until I had a fire at my own home. And then the chief approached me and recruited me at the scene of my fire, which is kind of, I don't know if that's the best time, but what it is, and it worked out well. So I was a firefighter with my paramedic for 9 years before I was medically retired with PTSD.
Yeah, that's quite a double whammy right there.
Yeah,
firefighter and EMT. I mean, that's a lot.
It is. Our department ran on the average of 2,300 ambulance calls a year. And then we did approximately 315 fire calls, 350, somewhere in there. But the ambulance calls really was our bread and butter. And we were all paramedics. So that's what we were expected to do is get on the ambulance when that ambulance tone went off. And then if the fire tone went off, we got to get on the fire truck. So it was a good time.
And yeah, in that line of that career path, there's no predictability. You can have, and that's the thing a lot of people don't understand. You could have a quiet day, you could have a quiet morning, and then excuse my language, the shit can hit the fan, and you're going from one call to a next potentially with no time in between really to decompress, to process the things that you've seen and dealt with and had to handle, which is, EMT alone, you're dealing with some graphic stuff a lot of the times. And I can't fathom, I know I couldn't do the job. So, I always like to take a pause when I talk to you guys and just say thank you sincerely, because you do a job that I know I couldn't do. I couldn't emotionally handle it. I just couldn't do it. So thank you so much for taking on a career and a job that takes such an incredible toll on the individual.
I appreciate that. I laugh when people say, "Oh, I couldn't do that," because after doing it for 23 years, I realized that it became an automatic response, and it always reverted back to training and education. And the adrenaline rush is really what pushed me, for at least for the first dozen years. The sounds of the tones going off, getting in the ambulance, screaming down the highway, hopefully making a difference for the patient that called. Didn't always work out that way, but that's life. But I say that in that I think a lot of people could do it. I really do, because that adrenaline gets you focused on what's going on. I don't want to say tunnel vision because it's a bad word in EMS, but you do kind of get tunnel vision on what's going on so you can fix the problem. So with the right training, I think most people have a helping attitude or helping heart. And I think that they could actually do more than they actually realize that they could. So, but I thank you for that.
Yeah.
It definitely is not for everybody.
Right.
There were certain calls that stuck with me a lot harder and were harder to get through and harder to process, to the point where, they got me retired from the department, not willingly.
Sure.
Actually, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, what people don't realize too, it's not just one incident. It's cumulative, and it's that repeated. And you're also taught and essentially trained to compartmentalize. And if you're putting things in drawers, in these figurative drawers, and not pulling them out and not addressing them ever, you're just adding trauma upon trauma upon trauma and never processing. And I think that's a very common problem for first responders, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And you mentioned compartmentalize, and I think that's something that we all do as humans to try and get through difficult stuff. I mean, studies have shown that we don't actually forget everything. It's just the way that they're processed as far as short-term and long-term memory, whether or not we remember them on a case-by-case basis or, day by day. There's a gentleman by the name of Rob Lethan. He's all over Facebook. He's a graphic artist, but he's a firefighter as well. And he approached me and he asked me if he could draw a rendition of what it sounds like my brain was like. And I said, sure. And I told him, and it's my head, and then the lid is lifted up. And there's filing cabinets there, the old big steel filing cabinets of the schools that they used to have, not the flimsy ones that they do now, but the heavy ones. And those were stuffed with files, because we file all of our memories into certain spaces, depending on if we need to retrieve them at a later date. Well, mine was so full, the drawers wouldn't close. The files were hanging out, sticking up all over the floor. It was a really great rendition of what my mind and my compartmentalization looked like. So, and I'm going to go back to what you said about trained to compartmentalize. I don't know that training is really done, or at least when I went through paramedic school and fire school, that there's really training on mental health, even compartmentalizing or what to do with those memories. I think that's a shortcoming. I know that's a shortcoming in all the academy trainings and things like that. Yes, there are some departments that are working to implement mental health training into their academies, but by far it's not included, and that's something that needs to change, and that's what we're hoping to stimulate.
I love that, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's a frequent conversation, training. And the issue, of course, is that you can do simulated trainings every day, all day, and it never compares to the real thing. So you can't really train someone to truly be prepared for what they're going to see and what they're going to have to do and deal with on the job. But you're so right. The training needs to come in for the mental health aspect of it. Are you seeing a change in that in a broader sense? Like there are places that are starting to implement. It's becoming more recognized. The need is becoming more recognized. And as you mentioned, Heroes Comfort, what you do is addressing that as well. Are you seeing that this is getting implemented more or not enough?
That's a great question. I just here in Iowa, I mean, our organization we have people in several states. So I can't necessarily speak for those states and their training systems because I haven't seen them. But in talking to people from them and in knowing what I know here in Iowa, I can say with confidence that there is a change coming, but it's not a significant change. And it's very, very slow because there still is a huge stigma, even within the ranks of PTSD, mental health, those kind of things. So I'm seeing a little bit, but I think where you're going to see the least movement or the least amount of change or slower change is going to be volunteer departments, because those departments don't get any real academy style training, real sit down training. Yes, they train their recruits to put up ladders and things like that and to do the job, but they don't focus on the mental health aspect. And I think part of that is because they're usually smaller communities and everybody knows everybody. And if it gets out that so-and-so struggled with a call, well, everybody in the community is going to know about it, whether you like it or not. So I see a little bit, but it's more so in the larger cities.
Sure. Yeah, I believe that, Mike, because I can tell you from my end of it, in the time that I've been doing these types of interviews and conversations, everyone I've ever spoken to is retired, off the job for one reason or another. And no one on the job as of yet will talk about these issues, and it's because they're on the job and the consequences are still there. So that's how, that's really, for me, that's the indicator that we have not come nearly far enough in helping our first responders. It makes me crazy. I have to be honest with you, it makes me so crazy that is the case, because if anyone deserves that type of help and guidance and support, it's our first responders. And to have them feel unable to seek help for repercussions and effects of the job, and of course how your peers may perceive you, or how you think your peers may perceive you, it's so sad to me, and it's so unfair to you guys. I want to go back, if you don't mind. I want to talk a little bit about PTSD and your experience with that. What I'm always wondering when I talk to you guys about this stuff is, when and how did you recognize that you were in crisis, or did you have to be told by someone else that you were essentially in crisis?
I think that for me, I could have been told years before I actually realized it. But there again, the stigma sets in, and your brother or sister on duty doesn't want to be the one to call you out, out of respect. Plus, they don't want to have to hear it because they don't want to deal with it themselves. My opinion is, probably 70% of first responders struggle with some symptoms of PTSD, whether they've been diagnosed or not. They're just afraid to admit it. But for me, it was towards the end of my career. So it was November of 2012 when I finally broke and had to go to my chief and get some time off and FMLA and stuff like that. So it was, 22 years in that I realized it, but I kind of had an inclination that something wasn't right about 3 years before that, at a house fire involving a child. And I lost it. I exploded. I started throwing things, punching things. Just I was in a mess. But I compartmentalized that, and I stuffed it down as hard as I could, and worked the next 3 years as hard as I could to not remember that. But it didn't happen. So there was a 3-year gap for me.
Yeah. What were some of the external experiences that you were experiencing? How was it affecting? I guess the question I'm asking is, how did this affect your home life and your work and all of those things? And I ask this for the family member perspective, so that we can learn how to recognize and how to help and how to be supportive when these things are going on, because maybe we don't recognize it.
Well, for me, it took a marriage to end. and all that kind of stuff that comes with it, to realize the impact that it had on the family. And my wife at the time didn't have any experience with PTSD or mental health, so she didn't understand it all. She saw me drinking. She saw me calling in sick a lot to work. She saw me angry with bursts of rage. And when she would try and talk to me about it, I would go off the handle and say, I don't want to effing talk about it. And so I contributed some to that. And eventually the marriage ended. And within about 6 months after that, the career ended. So it ties in a lot. And for me, I didn't want to bring anybody else into what I was feeling and what I had gone through. I didn't want to talk about the experience, primarily because I didn't want to relive it in my head, but I didn't want to expose anybody else to that as well. So, and that was a mistake. What I should have done and what I did eventually in my second marriage is I brought home stuff on PTSD and mental health and those kind of things for my wife to read, so she could kind of get a kind of an understanding. I mean, obviously it's not gonna put her in my shoes, but she has a better understanding now of, okay, he's withdrawing and isolating. He's probably having some depression issues and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that if they implemented that in training, and then said, hey, take this stuff home, share it with your significant other, whoever that is, and prepare them that you're going to see some bad things. You're going to have to process those, and there's certain ways that you're going to process them, but recognize warning signs like the heavy drinking, the isolation, recognize those warning signs, but also understand that if your partner isn't able to talk about it, it's okay. So yeah.
Yeah, everything you said, I agree with so completely. And I think it's so critically important for family members, the loved ones, spouses, partners, significant others, however you want to phrase it. It's so important for us to essentially get training as well, and in exactly the way that you're talking about. Give us, we need the information to know how to recognize, how to help, how to manage, how to be kind of, we talk about it in our household in early days. We talked about home basically being the haven. Home is the haven. This is the place you come to where you are completely safe, completely protected and loved and appreciating, and all of those things, and fostering that strong home environment where our first responder spouses have that peace where they can choose to either talk or not talk. We always have, I've said it many times before, we always kind of had a thing where if it was a rough day, if it was a bad day, the question would be, do you want conversation, silence, or distraction? And, whichever one the case was, that's what he got. And at some point, we would talk about it when he was ready to. So finding that balance, I think, is really important, and learning those tools and those skills is so important. Talk to me a little bit about how Heroes Comfort came about.
Sure. So, during the pandemic, I got on Facebook and met some other firefighters and had similar interests and beliefs that I do. And a couple of us started a Facebook message group, and we did some Bible study and some just some general talking and support of one another. And I noticed that more people were wanting to join. So I thought, well, let's make this a group. We made it a private group. So not anybody could just get in there and see what we're talking about. And about another 6 months rolls by, and we've got more and more members. And I just felt it in my heart that I was supposed to do more with this, because I was really getting a lot out of it, and I felt like I was helping people. So we decided to actually form an organization and get incorporated. So we operated for a little bit without our nonprofit status until we got it. We got that in February of 2021. And since then, we've grown to about 300 members, and we're in, I think, 6 or 7 states right now with members throughout the country. And we provide peer support, and we've also arranged with providers in each of those 7 states to perform free therapy for the first responders that we refer to them. And I know of a couple that have actually used that. Other than that, it's pretty quiet about it. We'll give out the information, and then that's all we do. We don't want to stay involved in it because it's just not right. And we award service animals, which we're awarding here in another couple of weeks. We're awarding another one to an individual in another state. We have a toll-free support line. I don't call it a hotline because it's not any professional counseling. It's just peers that have volunteered with our organization to take calls at all hours of the day or night to support somebody that needs some help.
That is so vastly important, the peer support part of that, because I know from all the conversations that I've had, that is one of the issues. Going to someone who has, and it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Going to someone who cannot relate to your experience, who's never experienced them, it's really hard to get them to understand. So having, for you guys to be able to speak with someone who knows exactly what you're experiencing, it's invaluable, right? It's got to be such a tremendous relief to hear that voice on the other line who says, I know, go ahead, tell your story. You're not going to tell me anything that I haven't heard or experienced or know about. So go ahead. And I can only imagine the relief in that, really.
There is a huge sense of relief. And just a little background on my process. I didn't have anybody like that. There were no resources really that I knew about anyway that provided peer support back in 2012, 2013. So it was hard to find somebody to talk to that understood. And then you couple that with the fact that I didn't know what a trauma-trained therapist was. I thought a therapist was a therapist. So I went to therapy. I went through a couple different therapists because they just didn't understand it. They didn't get it because number one, they've never been there. Number two, they haven't been, trained for that kind of stuff. Usually it was more about, so tell me about your worst call. And that's not what we're there for. We're there for help with dealing with our mental health and our anxiety and our depression and our anger and those kind of things. Again, I think it is a sense of help. I've talked to several people that have on the hotline or the support line myself, and I can hear the sense of need. And then by the time the call is done, they're usually, thank you so much. You've really helped. And that sense of help just, that's
it's life-changing. It's life-changing, absolutely, and in the best possible way. And it's so gratifying to hear that people like you and your organization are out there doing these things. And, of course, it's long overdue, certainly, but, I see the tide turning, and it takes people like you who are willing to do that and to share your personal experiences, because you're essentially opening a wound, for everyone to peer inside of. And it goes against every bit of, nature as a first responder, as a firefighter, as a EMT, people who compartmentalize and protect others, not only protect and save others from danger, from bad experiences, but you also protect them from your own experiences. And so that's the isolation, really, that you're so busy being the protector that no one is protecting you until now. So this is such an incredible service you guys are providing.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, I think it's a calling, and it's definitely a way for me to give back to those brothers and sisters in whatever uniform, because we provide services to first responders, dispatchers, corrections officers, veterans, ER and ICU nurses and doctors. So we try to involve everybody that would be potentially involved in, say, a specific call where we respond, law enforcement responds. We send them on to the hospital and the ER. They go on to ICU So we try to help everybody involved. So.
That's beautiful. How can everyone find Heroes Comfort? How can they get in touch with you guys?
We are on the web at www.heroescomfort.org. We're also on Facebook. If you search for Community Support Heroes Comfort, you'll find our public page. We're on Instagram at Heroes Comfort. We also have our closed group if any first responder wants to, just dive in and see. I mean, we have people on there that really don't interact per se, but I know that people are getting the information we're putting out there. So if anybody's interested in that, it's just search Facebook for Heroes Comfort closed group. We also have a toll-free number. It's 844-443-7671. That number is answered 24 hours a day.
That's incredible. Mike, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your organization with us and our listeners. And again, I thank you for the work that you're doing. It's pretty wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. All right, guys, this was the Elsa Kurt Show. That was Mike Crowe from Heroes Comfort. Go check them out and pass them along to anyone that you know that might be in need right now. Take care, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.